At 77, Tony Iommi finally broke his silence. For more than half a century, he had stood beside Ozzy Osbourne, his closest musical brother. They had survived fame, addiction, lineup changes, years of silence, and decades of being pulled apart and pulled back together. Through all of it, there was always an unspoken belief that there would be more time, more shows, more phone calls, more old jokes traded across a stage. When Ozzy died, that belief collapsed all at once, and what Tony said afterward, in his first interview since the loss, revealed something fans had not expected. It suggested Ozzy may have sensed this ending long before anyone else around him did. Tony Iommi has lived through moments that would have broken most people. Decades before the world knew his name, he lost the tips of 2 fingers in a factory accident, an injury that should have ended any hope of a career in music. He rebuilt his technique from nothing. He survived the chaos of sudden fame and the internal tension of one of the most turbulent bands in rock history. He watched members come and go, friendships strain and mend, entire eras of the band rise and fade. He and Ozzy had been through breakups, solo careers, and reunions fans never thought would happen, along with long stretches where the two barely spoke. And still, somehow, they kept finding their way back to each other, decade after decade. But by his own account, nothing prepared him for the morning he learned Ozzy Osbourne was gone. When the news reached him, Tony's reaction wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no immediate outpouring, no words ready to meet the moment. Speaking to ITV News just a day after Ozzy's death on July 22nd, Tony said it simply hadn't sunk in. His mind kept circling back to one fact that made the news feel impossible. He had received a text from Ozzy only the day before. Not a goodbye. Not anything weighted with meaning. Just a message. The kind two people exchange after more than 50 years of knowing each other. That ordinary exchange was, in Tony's mind, proof that Ozzy was still part of tomorrow. There had been no signal that time had run out. He described the feeling as surreal, almost like reality had skipped a step. It wasn't grief he felt first. It was disorientation. And it was only later, alone at night, replaying the day in his head, that the weight of it began to land. Tony admitted that he caught himself wondering if he was dreaming the whole thing. That question kept circling back, because when he looked honestly at the weeks before, the signs actually had been there. Ozzy had not looked well through rehearsals for what would become his final show. Tony and the band could see it. Ozzy's strength came in short bursts, and the people around him adjusted without being asked. Rehearsals were shortened. He was brought in already seated. He'd sing a few songs, share a laugh about old times, and then he'd leave to rest. No one pushed him further than that, and no one pretended his limits weren't real. What stayed with Tony afterward wasn't the illness itself. It was how little Ozzy said about it. He didn't dramatize what he was going through or ask for sympathy. He showed up for what he could manage, did it fully, joke when he had the energy to joke, and then quietly step back. Looking back, Tony came to believe Ozzy wasn't pacing himself for a future chapter. He was holding on to whatever strength he had left for one specific purpose, and he wasn't advertising that to anyone. That purpose, Tony became convinced, was a single night in Birmingham. It wasn't a theory he floated lightly. He said plainly that he believed Ozzy had pushed through exhaustion and illness specifically to make sure that performance happened, and he wasn't alone in thinking it. He and bandmate Geezer Butler had talked it over privately and landed on the same conclusion. Ozzy didn't make it to that stage by accident or by luck. He held on long enough to say goodbye on his own terms, in his hometown, in front of the people who'd been there from the start. The show itself, back to the beginning, was built entirely around what Ozzy's body could still endure. By that point, his Parkinson's disease had progressed significantly, compounded by the toll of multiple spinal surgeries. He couldn't stand for any real length of time, which is why he performed seated on a bat wing throne rather than on his feet. That wasn't a creative choice. It was the only way he could be there at all. Even months earlier, at his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, he had remained seated throughout, a sign of just how far his condition had progressed. Tony said Ozzy had spent time training specifically to get through that one performance, not to extend his career or hint at more shows down the road, but simply to finish something. In Tony's words, it seemed like Ozzy had something fixed in his head, the sense that this was going to be the last thing he ever did. The concert itself held at Villa Park in the band's hometown of Birmingham, was no small affair. Ozzy performed 5 songs with his own solo band before being joined by Iommi, Butler, and Ward for 4 more as Black Sabbath, including an emotional rendition of Mama, I'm Coming Home. Combined with live-stream ticket sales around the world, the event raised more than $190 million for charity. For Tony, the scale of it almost didn't register in the moment. He has described the whole night as feeling like a dream, the kind where you're not entirely sure what just happened until it's already over and everyone's walking off stage. Tony also noticed something else that night, something quieter than relief. Ozzy had wanted to stand during the performance. You could see him trying. His body simply wouldn't allow it. And Tony sensed that frustration came less from pride than from instinct. The performer in him still fighting even as his strength gave out. For Tony, that night wasn't a comeback or a victory lap. It was an ending, and he said as much directly. The gig was for Ozzy first, shaped entirely around what he could still physically give. It also marked the first time in roughly 20 years that drummer Bill Ward had played with the original lineup, which made the reunion feel complete rather than reopened. There was no talk afterward of more shows, no quiet hope of another tour. Everyone understood, without needing to say it, that this was the last time those 4 men would stand together as Black Sabbath. Tony has said the band will never attempt that again in any form, with any other singer, because without Ozzy it simply wouldn't be Black Sabbath. What stunned him most, looking back, was how little time was left after that night. He admitted they expected some distance between the farewell, and whatever came next, not 17 days. The goodbye and the loss ended up arriving almost as one event, and that changed how Tony has come to see the whole performance. What once looked like a triumphant return now reads, in hindsight, like the final page of something written with very specific intent. When Tony spoke about Ozzy as a person rather than performer, his tone shifted into something more personal. The 2 of them had gone to school together long before any of the fame, just 2 boys from the same working-class part of Birmingham. Tony has said he knew Ozzy longer than anyone else in the band did, and that history mattered to him. He described Ozzy as naturally funny, unpredictable, and completely unfiltered. Someone who said whatever he was thinking, often especially after being told not to. Even in serious moments on stage, Ozzy would find a way to crack the tension, pulling faces at Tony, then doing the same to Geezer, a private joke the audience could see, but never quite understand the way the band did. That's the context behind Tony's most simple, most repeated line about losing him. There will never be another Ozzy, not because of fame, but because there was only one way he moved through the world, one way he talked to people, one way he turned a room. None of that could be recreated. For Tony, this wasn't just losing a bandmate. It was losing someone who had been there at the very beginning, through every peak and every collapse, and at the final bow, despite the grief that's followed. Tony has also said he feels something close to gratitude that the show happened at all. If they hadn't gone through with it, he's pointed out, fans never would have got to see all 4 original members together one final time, and Ozzy never would have gotten his proper send-off in front of the people who'd followed him from the very start. Instead, he got to stand or sit in front of his hometown crowd one more time, hear them sing his songs back to him, and walk away knowing he'd finished what he set out to do. And now, for the first time in more than 50 years, Tony is continuing on without him, carrying the memory of a friendship that started in a school hallway in Birmingham and ended, fittingly, in the very same city.